So many moons ago, about 25 years ago, when I was a young man, I went on a canoe trip with my youngest sister, Elaine, in Algonquin Park. It was a whole planned, 4-day affair where we went to the outfitters and rented the canoe and had all our supplies and went off. And I remember starting from this lake. I don't know if you've been to Algonquin, this massive wilderness place where you can do all kinds of, out hiking and canoeing and so on. So we set off in this lake called Opiongo, one of the biggest lakes in Algonquin. And this area is known for its very quick changes in the weather. There's kind of like mini weather systems that go on there because of all the hills and the lakes and the trees and so on. And so when we set off, it was a nice day. And we were heading off at the other side of the lake to our campsite. And so off we went, and this wind came up. And it was causing the waves to come up, and got a little, I can feel myself getting tense. My sister was a much more experienced canoeist than I. And so as we approached where we needed to go, we were kind of losing a bit of control because of the wind this crosswind that was coming at us. And on one side of the place where we were supposed to camp were these kind of rocks and stuff, and that was the way the wind was pushing us. So we had to land somehow. And so my sister, being the experienced canoeist, said, what you've got to do, Dominic, is we've got to point the canoe in the sort of other direction. If we were going east, we've got to point it sort of north, And that way, you kind of take into account this crosswind. And so instead of pointing the canoe right to our destination and having the wind push us into the rocks, what we were doing is sort of pointing it away from and beyond our destination. By that way, the wind would just kind of push us in the direction of where we wanted to land. And we had nothing else to lose, and so this is what we tried. And sure enough, it worked. We didn't end up kind of moving with the wind against these rocks and having the risk of capsizing and everything going awry. We ended up more or less where we needed to be. And I think that's a good analogy really for what we're about in the spiritual life, in our Christian life. Particularly as we, again, enter the season of Advent, and we're called to sort of recalibrate our spiritual lives and think about, what this season is all about. Advent, meaning that word coming, so this whole mystery and wonder of God coming into our midst in the person of Jesus. What does that mean? And how does that give us hope? Because if we look at life, and so often we kind of set our goals, we have a destination, we have a purpose of where we want to be. When we kind of move toward that. But so often we don't take into account these things that kind of tend to kind of come up against us and push us off that course. So we so easily end up missing the mark. And this goal we have, this purpose, this meaning that we have for our lives is really what we're trying to live. It's not something foreign or different. We're just trying to live a good life. We want to provide for our family. We want to have a circle of people around us that we can love and be loved by. We want to be able to forgive when things go a bit wrong. We want to be compassionate. We want to be generous. We want to work hard, keep the roof over our heads. We want our children to succeed. And these are just good, proper, things that we aspire to as human beings. But so often what happens is, though, these winds of life kind of hit us. COVID, for example. It just kind of comes out of the blue, and it threatens to push us off course and leave us in a place that's frustrating us because it's preventing us from living that life that we want to live, that healthy, good life that we want to live. We end up isolated, alone, afraid, anxious, It could be any number of things that come and sweep us off our course. It could be a loss of a job. It could be an illness. Anything, And sometimes it's much bigger than ourselves, It's the war in Ukraine, that leaves us, feeling very hopeless. So how do we then navigate this? How do we, find a way of getting to that place where we need to be, where God wants us to be, where we're going to have that life of flourishing, of thriving, of just being, alive in a human sense, of all those things that we associate with life. I think what we've got to do in a sense is point the canoe of our life, if you will, to something higher, than what that goal is, than what that life is. And so here we're talking about what God has given us, this capacity to transcend our lives, to look at something much bigger than ourselves. God has given us that gift, right? And so he wants us to turn to him, to turn to the person who can transcend us all, who is above all. And if we do that, then we start to enkindle this flame that we call hope, because now we're not just looking at this reality or what's becoming, what's shaping it and throwing us off our reality, Then we're looking at something much bigger. If we think about that first reading, that's exactly what God is doing through Isaiah. We have these Israelites, and the Assyrian Empire is crushing them. The whole northern kingdom has been obliterated, and the southern kingdom of Judah, the temple, Jerusalem, and so on, is besieged. And things are looking really bad. They just wanted to have that life, of being able to worship God, of living the Ten Commandments and so on, and it hasn't worked out, And so God presents to them this vision that seems to just be way beyond anything they could ever imagine. God says, you're not going to be crushed. You're going to actually be the center of the world, and all the nations are going to come flowing to you. You're going to be the highest mountain in the world, the greatest kingdom, if you will, right? Not according to worldly standards, but according to my standards. And this is what's going to happen. Swords are going to be bent into plowshares. Nation will never lift the sword against another nation. In fact, people won't even know what war is about, And people will be invited to walk in the light of the Lord. So God holds out this aspiration, this hope to the nation of Israel, right? So that they could then be able to walk toward this life that they know is the good life, this life that they need to live. But if they just simply focused on that reality that's before them, this life that's becoming dissipated and crushed and so on, then they'd probably end up on the rocks somewhere, in a place of isolation, of frustration, of really missing the mark. And so it is in our lives. We know what that life is that we want. We know what that good life is. But if we simply just head toward it, with our own skill, with our own wherewithal, and we forget to sort of look toward God, then we're probably going to miss the mark. We're going to end up on some rock somewhere, right? We're going to end up in some place of frustration. We're going to end up disconnected. We're going to end up perhaps even addicted to something. We're going to end up very angry, perhaps jealous, in a place that just is very separated from this life that we desire, this life that we're made for. And so during this Advent season, we're reminded then of how we are called to transcend our reality, to transcend ourselves, but not to do that from our own power, but to simply to hope in not just an ideal, but a person, Jesus, who reveals God to us, who promises us that he is the way, the truth, and the life, who promises us salvation. And so as we continue with this Eucharist today, as we enter into this first week of Advent, where we're invited to just reflect on and to cultivate this dimension of hope, this power, if you will, of being able to hope. Let us look not to ourselves for that, but to Jesus, to God, and point our spiritual sights toward him, and in doing so, find ourselves moving toward the very destination that we so much desire. This life, this goodness, this truth, this community, whatever those things are in our life that make us flourish and alive, our families, with that capacity to be patient with them, to forgive one another, to be generous with one another, to be compassionate with one another, right? And in doing so, then, let us continue down this journey of hope, of preparation, of joy, and of love, and then finally, be ready to celebrate this whole wonderful mystery of Christmas.